Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this Inside the Doc for the 22nd edition of FIFO. We are talking about the film Marimari today, presented in the competition category of the festival. The film sets the scene in Papua-New-Guinea, where communities are ruled by the fear of witches. One woman fights to rescue the accused families with the only resources she has, compassion. We meet her all along the film, as it unveils her story, her fights, her hopes and worries for her people. Today, we are honored to welcome Paul WOLFFRAM, filmmaker from Aotearoa and director of the film Marimari, for this conversation. Paul Yaurana, and thank you very much for joining us on this occasion, and also congratulations on this outstanding film and the selection at FIFO.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
You have been participating in many editions of our festival, and your film has made it several times in the competition category of the festival. And this is another film of yours that gets presented in the competition category of the festival. What did you expect when you submitted the film for FIFO, for the consideration of FIFO?
Well, the issues of sorcery, accusation-related violence are something that concerns the Pacific as a whole. You know, this is a fairly newly arrived problem in the Pacific, and I thought it would be of interest and is pertinent to other Pacific nations too, who are also undergoing rapid periods of change in their societies. And certainly that's what's happening in the highlands of Papua-New Guinea.
Okay. And how did you get the idea of the film?
Oh, well, I've been working in Papua-New Guinea now for over 20 years, coming
Yes.
and going, living with communities in the rainforests and learning languages and cultural areas. Most of my films in the Pacific celebrate culture and the people there, and work with them to translate narratives into filmic form. But it was about 7 years ago, back in 2017, that I went up to the Goroka. I was doing some guest teaching up in the University of Goroka. And it was at that time I kind of came face to face with the issues around sorcery, accusation-related violence, and the witch accusations, or sanguma, as it's called in Topisin.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of struck by these things don't occur all over Papua New Guinea. The island regions where I traditionally work and where I've kind of spent many years don't have these issues. So I was interested to find out more, and kind of struck by the way that people would tell me about the issues around sorcery violence and relay their participation in these pretty violent acts, but they would relay them without any sort of apparent fear of being held to account for them by police. They saw themselves as defending their own communities and as protectors of their own communities, even though some of their acts included torture and killing of women. So that's how I sort of got interested in this. With such a long history and working period with Papua New Guinea, I thought, how can I use my skills as a filmmaker to try and both understand and stop the violence that is happening in these communities that I have such a strong link with.
Okay. You said you were teaching at the University at Goroka. And what is your background? Are you a filmmaker or?
Yeah, so I teach here at Te Here-Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, here in New Zealand. I teach filmmaking and particularly production studies. But my background is as a ethnographer, and I've lived and worked in various parts of the Pacific and with Māori communities here in New Zealand, understanding mainly music and dance. So my background is in music and dance practices of the Pacific, and understanding and trying to make accounts of pretty remote peoples in Melanesia, But over the years of studying the music and dance, I became more interested in narrative forms and creative forms. And in the various parts of Papua-New Guinea that I worked in, creativity comes from ancestors, mostly through dreams, and that's how I began to be fascinated with how to tell narratives across culture as well. Okay, that's really interesting.
How long was the film in the making?
Marimari has taken 7 years to get here.
7 years.
Yes, of course we were COVID interrupted. At first I went over there back to the Highlands. I was there in 2017 when I first started to come across these stories of sorcery violence. I went back in 2018, and that's when I first met and started to interview various people involved in this, whether they were supporting the survivors of sorcery violence or they were police or even the people that the superintendents of the penitentiaries, government workers. And then I also came across some of the human rights defenders who are trying to rescue those accused of sorcery. It was at that time that I came across Evelyn Kunda, the film's protagonist, and I thought, great, here's a way I can tell this story. So I did interviews and just exploratory work in 2018. I went back in 2019. My intention was to return in 2020 to do the bulk of the principal photography, but COVID interrupted us. So it wasn't until 2022 that I was able to go back and spend 3 or 4 months shooting the main part of the picture.
Okay, well, 7 years in the making. We can easily imagine that making this film probably wasn't easy. What has been the most difficult thing during this time? I mean, besides the COVID interruption, obviously.
Well, several difficult things. I mean, finding the finances to make feature-length documentaries these days in Aotearoa is a very challenging thing. There is, I'm lucky enough to live and work in an institution, so I don't need to make any money off my films. I wouldn't be able to survive if that was the case. It's a real challenging environment at the moment to try and find the finances to make these sorts of works. And, by international standards, the money that I'm looking for is very modest. But it's still a really difficult thing to do, to find money to be able to work with the professionals, the editors, the cinematographers that enable a film to reach a wide audience. So that's one side of it. And the other side of it is probably, over the years working with the survivor families and with the other human rights defenders, I can see how they every day they're facing and working with people that are at the worst moments of their lives, experience extreme trauma. They've often been, physically attacked and are unable to communicate very well. And I'm looking at the situation in which there are very few resources and ways to help these people. They are often kind of swept under the carpet, as it were, by the government in Papua-New-Guinea. There are no social services to support them provided by the government. These are all done by volunteers like Evelyn Kunda, these amazing people who are basically risking their lives to rescue these people. So this is a difficult situation. It breaks my heart to see a country that is so rich in culture and rich in resources, in many ways, one of the most beautiful places on earth, to, go through and have these darker sides where these communities are literally tearing themselves apart.
Okay. Also, the violence described in the film is really hard to cope. Very graphically described and voiced out by the victims. Why was it so important to you to be that descriptive in the film?
Well, most of the world do not know what goes on in Papua-New Guinea. People do not know the levels of violence that are, in that community and how shocking that is. the opening of the film does go at things rather directly. We don't show any graphic violence. We've got reenactments, and we've got moments before and moments after. And I think the audience will be able to see very clearly what is going on there. But we have to look at things directly to understand them. And the tendency to shy away or to avoid looking at these difficult subjects is what allows them to flourish in the darkness. So it is our job as filmmakers and international observers and human rights defenders to take action here and to show the world what is going on. And this means that it, at times is uncomfortable to look at. These are horrific events that are occurring in Papua-New Guinea, but it is our job as documenters, documentarians, and as people who care for other people in the world to look at these things directly.
And impact-wise, is this the achievement, the goal that you set for this film?
Yeah, I mean, we want to reach as wide an audience as possible to let the world know what's happening in Papua-New Guinea and to help move the dial and to bring an end to this violence in these communities. I have no illusions that a film will be able to change the world, but it can be part of the action that needs to happen here. One of the things that we're doing with the film is we're raising money for a safe house. It's an impact documentary. We so far have raised 40,000 New Zealand dollars towards our 80,000 goal by the end of 2025. What we want to do is build a safe house where Evelyn and other human rights defenders can receive the survivors of sorcery violence, and they can be looked after in safety. At the moment, as you'll see in the film, Evelyn is doing what she can with her meager resources, which is she puts up the survivors in her own house and often does so at extreme risk to herself as well as risk to the survivors. She's living in the slums and the sort of shanty towns outside of the main part of Goroka, and there at any time people can come in and threaten her and the people that she's looking after. So we're working with the Catholic Church in an area called Kefamo, just outside of Goroka, to build this safe house and to have a safe compound in which the survivors can be cared for in relative safety. So that's part of our impact goals for the entire film. Okay, perfect. Along with Evelyn, the film introduces a number of protagonists, compassion workers, and as they define themselves, police officers, but also accused families, survivors, and attackers and accusers as well. How did you get access to all of them, and how did you get them to participate, to cooperate for the film? Yeah, it's an interesting question, but I guess given my language facilities, the fact that I speak both Indigenous languages and Tokpisin, the lingua franca that is used there, and I'm clearly pink and blonde and blue-eyed, so I don't look like a local. But people are often struck by the fact, I guess, that when I start talking to them, they get a bit of a shock because I sound like their grandfather. I learned these languages in small rainforest communities 20 years ago. And so now when I go to the towns and talk to young men and other people, they get a bit shocked because I present in many ways like the older men from their communities. So I have this incredible access to these communities. And like I was saying to you earlier, the communities that I'm working with and the people, the perpetrators of the violence, I've taken care to make sure that I'm not treating them as evil or other. In fact, I'm trying to show that these people are all normal people, but they've been caught up in this sort of, if you like, almost similar to a pandemic in which they've suddenly, this idea that sorcery can kill their community has captured this area and spread like wildfire. So I'm really not, even the policemen who say that they believe and don't take action, the perpetrators of the violence. I'm trying to present them in the film and understand their perspectives. Now, of course, I don't agree with all of those perspectives, and some of them are really challenging for us to understand. But I'm trying to present the community as a whole in the film. So they had no issue with talking to me directly. And in fact, I would often say to the perpetrators when they're telling the stories of the horrific things that they did to other human beings, I would say to them, maybe you should say when they did this rather than when I did this, or when and they won't care. They don't see themselves at being risk of prosecution, because they get, in the highlands of Papua-New-Guinea, these things they're not prosecuted. The police do not come into community and do these things, arrest people. So the perpetrators are getting away with things at the moment, and they know that they're not going to be held to account. So as you'll see in the film, they talk with impunity about their actions. Now, with the survivors, that's another place where I had to take extreme care. I don't need to be very careful not to make these situations worse for them. But most of the time, the survivors in the film want their story to be told. They want people to know that they are innocent and that they have had their lives turned upside down and their family members killed for something that they know nothing about and is not their fault. So they're often passionate and really want their stories to be told as well.
Okay. Yes. Yes, that's understandable. And at some point or somehow, have you and the team put yourself in danger or feel that your life would be threatened somehow?
I've been coming and going from Papua-New Guinea for 20 years, and I find the place wonderful. The events you see in the film are shocking and terrible, and yet it's not my experience of Papua-New Guinea. Okay. My experience of Papua-New Guinea is wherever my car breaks down, and it probably breaks down because the roads are terrible. People will look after you. People will come out and invite you into their village and ask you to stay with them. And that all they want is to host you. And like many parts of the Pacific, people are extremely warm. There are times in the film, as you'll see, we were out in Wabag in the western part of the highlands, where things are really getting pretty rough out there at the moment. The law and order doesn't really have much control over the areas outside of the towns. And the tribal fighting in those areas is getting quite worse in the last couple of years. There used to be with bows and arrows, and now, of course, it's with high-powered automatic rifles. So we're in a couple of situations where we're trying to talk with survivors of sorcery violence, and they were back in their own communities, but all around them, the level of violence in the community, if you like, the water table for violence is climbing all the time with these tribal fighting going on. So in those situations, I, just get out of the situation, go back into the towns and areas where things are a little bit more under control. But in general, Papua New Guinea is not a place that I've had any issues with.
Okay. Have you already screened the film in Papua-New Guinea?
No, we're hoping to do that next year. So far, the film is screened here in Aotearoa. We screened it throughout the country and had sold out audiences here. Really great response from people in Aotearoa. Just really strong warmth. And like I said, we've already raised half of our $80,000, which is pretty incredible. And that's from community funding. And we played in Hawaii earlier in October. Yes. And I think we're going to be in screening in Port Moresby sometime in April, May next year when I'm traveling over. And I think the New Zealand Embassy is going to be hosting a screening in Port Moresby. And we'd like to get all those NGOs and other sort of international embassy members and government workers involved in sorcery, accusation-related violence to come and see the film as well at that time. Okay. It might be worth mentioning that the project's a bit wider than just the feature film. Okay. You make a film audience, and that the audience is for a feature film has to be targeted. And so, of course, we're targeting international film festivals and eventually platforms with Marimari. But in Papua New Guinea, the people there on the ground, they have no interest or at least access. They have no culture of absorbing and watching films like we do. perhaps. And so I've made a series of short films targeted towards Papua-New Guineans in the local language. So I went up there earlier this year in May and worked with youth groups and students at the University of Goroka, and we shot a whole series of short, funny, anti-violence videos. Now, it seems a bit strange to be making funny videos about sorcery violence, but we're trying to reach that youth market. We're trying to communicate with them a strong, moral, anti-violence message. And I'm really pleased that since we've released those things on TikTok back in May and YouTube more recently, we have over 800,000 views. And given that those films are only in tok pisin, the lingua franca of the Highlands, it's only Papua-New Guineans watching those things.
Yes.
So we're talking, we really have been successful in engaging the young people of the Highlands to watch these videos. So kind of an amazing outcome there. And hopefully beginning to, allow people to question their belief systems. What we know about sorcery violence is that you can't just turn around and say, this belief is wrong. When you say that, people close their minds to what you are saying. What you have to do is convince them that maybe there are other reasons behind events other than sorcery. So you might point towards lifestyle diseases. All right, this person might have died of a heart attack. And in those cases, maybe then the people who have the belief in sorcery can say, yes, there might be another explanation, and that might stay their hand or stop them from moving towards violence. So that's what the aim of those short films are, is to have media designed to communicate to people in Papua-New Guinea. Marimari is a film, if you like, for an outside audience, for an audience of the rest of the world, to allow them to access and understand what is going on in Papua-New Guinea.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting, and it's an amazing work. Lastly, a more generalist question. What advice would you give to a young filmmaker who's willing to take the plunge into documentary filmmaking?
It's advice that I guess I give fairly frequently, because I work with young people here in Aotearoa and Te Here Nuoka, the university where I teach. It's lucky, very privileged position to work with young people. And that keeps my life exciting, and I'm always exposed to the new ideas by younger students. And that is, there are so many stories to tell, I guess, out there in the world, and many of them are really important. And it's finding those stories that you have special access to and you are deeply passionate about. Filmmaking, like in the example of Marimari, it takes 7 years for me to make a film. These are long journeys. And on the way, I've been, amazing experiences and been able to work with incredible people and get to know people that I would never have been able to have access to if I hadn't been doing this work. So, given that these things are so time-consuming, often very difficult to achieve, as I mentioned earlier around the money side of things, it's very difficult to be a filmmaker in this climate. Money for the arts is not there, and so you've got to have that passion. You've got to be really more than just interested in the subject that you're looking at. You've got to be really wanting to give a section of your life to that subject and to the thing that you're looking at. Now, with a project like Marimari, that seems worthwhile because, there is the hope that maybe we can help to bring about change for the better and make an impact documentaries that will allow the world to understand and access these stories. Seems like it is worthwhile at times. So that would be my advice. Find your passions, find your stories.
Perfect. That's a very good word for the end. Thank you very much, Paul, for your time and for kindly joining us for this conversation. All the best for the competitions and for your upcoming projects as well. And yes, thanks again. Thank you very much to all of you who have watched this conversation with Paul WOLFFRAM, director of the film Marimari. This film will be screened at FIFO, on site at Maison de la Culture from the 31st of January until the 9th of February 2025, but also online on fifotahiti.com during the same period. Thanks again, Paul, and I hope we'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you.